Welcome back to another episode of Choose Courage Inc., where we help creatives, entrepreneurs, and aspiring corporate escape artists break free from the systems that were never built for them and create businesses where people, creativity, and courage come first. I'm Vivianne Castillo, founder of Choose Courage Inc., and y'all, I just need to tell you how this episode happened, okay? So I don't know about you, but I've just been so freaking tired of all the conversations about AI. And if I freaking see one more LinkedIn post about the 7 chat GPT prompts that will 10x your productivity, I might actually throw my laptop into the deepest, darkest hole I could find. But most of what's out there is shallow, right? It's extractive, it's kind of gross and not actually useful for people like us who are trying to build something with a little bit of soul in it, right? But there's exactly one person that I want to have this conversation with, and that's my friend, Ovetta Sampson. She is a 15-year veteran of designing intelligent experiences for some of the biggest companies in the world. Business Insight. You know what? I'm going to get into it in a second. But this week, I hosted a live conversation with her called How to UnF Your AI to Get the Outcomes That Align with Your Creative Spirit and Your Values. And the replay is what you're about to listen to today. Now, there's a lot of gems in this episode, but there's this one sentence Ovetta says that she says it almost in passing. She says, "We bring the wisdom. The AI doesn't work without the wisdom." And I've been sitting with that all week because somewhere in the middle of our conversation, this stopped being about AI for me. It started being about what it costs you to stay somewhere that's quietly rewriting how you think, how you create, and how much of your own voice you can still hear. We're going to get into it. I'm really excited for this episode. We have some treats as well in the show notes, and we drop some goodies as well along the way. So grab some water, get a pen and paper, and let's jump into it. Let's go. Today, I'm joined by someone that I trust dearly, a good friend, Ovetta Sampson, 15-year veteran of designing intelligent experiences for some of the largest companies in the world. Business Insider named her one of the top 15 people in enterprise AI. She is the founder of Right AI, where she advises executive teams on how to implement AI in ways that are actually equitable, sustainable, and ethical, not just marketable, which we need a little bit more of that these days. Just a little bit, just a little bit. So, and more than any of that, she is truly one of the few people in this space doing the work of naming the human engagement risks of AI out loud at a moment when most of the industry is just trying to rush past them in order to secure the bag and make more money. So I asked her to come on today because I trust how she thinks. I'm excited to get into this conversation with her. Personally, for me, I am so tired and over the conversation around AI, but I'm willing and I'm only willing to have it with Avetta because the conversation we're about to have needs, I think, her specific lens. So, Avetta, thank you so much for being here. And what I want to maybe start with, Avetta, is, and I know you and I have talked about this before, but I'm really curious about your take on when someone tells you that their AI just doesn't sound right, what do you feel like they're actually diagnosing? Because I don't think most people know what they're really frustrated about.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me, Vivian. I just am so glad to be here. I do take to heart your words about being trustworthy, and I appreciate that. And welcome to everybody. So I went to Iceland, and in Iceland, it's like an island, even though people don't really think of it that way because it's on a volcano, right? And I love Iceland and everything, but I went to this Italian restaurant and I ordered kind of like spaghetti and meatballs, which is the staple,
The
but
classic.
tasted it, I was like, "Man, this really just tastes off." It tastes like somebody who has read an Italian book, right? And then decided to cook Italian meatballs, but just not quite there. And I like to use that analogy when it comes to machines. And
Mm.
the reason why when you're dealing with machines that they're doing the things that you're asking them to do, art, poetry, writing, whatever, but the outcome seems just a bit off is for two things. One thing is called the median trap. The
Mm.
way that machines are trained is that they gravitate towards the statistically common. So basically, their whole goal is mediocrity, right? They're trained on the most popular, the most statistically common thing. That's how they're trained, right? And I like to say that LLMs, especially, are like a very sophisticated Mad Lib. Their whole job is to fill in the blank. And the way that they fill in the blank is by going towards the median, the middle, the mediocrity. And so when you go to design with AI or when you go to engage with them to create, you're always starting from that average median inside the middle of the bell curve.
Mhm,
And for
mhm.
creatives who spend our life, this is what we call Gen AI slop, right? For creatives who spend our lives on the outside of that, right? It can feel really disjointed and very, very frustrating. So I think
Yeah.
the first thing is that median trap. And when you're designing with AI, you got to get over that. And there are ways that you can do that to get the kind of outcomes that you're looking for. And I liken it to the median trap is now a prison because it used to
Mm.
be that 25% of the internet was generated by machines. Now it's over 50%. So now the machine is cannibalizing itself, right? So now the median trap, and I don't remember, I'm dating myself, but I used to hard code websites, actually having to build them from scratch. And then Twitter came out with Bootstrap. And then all of a sudden, all the
Oh,
websites
yeah.
had image galleries, right? And the left nav and all that.
That's
And
funny.
this is the Bootstrap on steroids, basically. So
Yeah.
that's why everybody's talking about taste and discernment and all this stuff, because the machine puts us at mediocrity. And if
Mm.
they use it, we have to understand the floor that we're starting.
Yo, and I appreciate you just bringing us back to Bootstrap for those of
Yeah,
all
dude.
who remember. I was like, "Yeah, I remember when that was like."
Remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Before Bootstrap, you had all these weird versions of websites,
Yeah.
right? But then after that, it was like this
Funny.
homogenized Western colonial view, right? That how they do everything. And so now everybody has to fit into this box. And if
Yeah.
creative, you're like, wait a minute, this isn't the box I want to fit into. And I have some examples of some artists who are breaking out of that box. One of them is Nice Aunties. Her name is Wei. She's from Singapore. She's Chinese. And she's doing some amazing things with AI as an artist. And
Mhm.
it's definitely not the median prison that normal engagement with LLMs put us in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like at least some of the conversations I'm having these days, especially in like my DMs, is when someone says that their AI doesn't sound right, what they usually mean on the surface is the output's flat or it's generic or it's mediocre or the cadence is weird where everyone has started to recognize this feels a little off. And I do think those things are real, but I think some of the actual frustration that might be sitting underneath that is that people are sitting with this reality that something that's supposed to maybe extend them is erasing them instead.
Yeah, I think, I was just at SCAD, you know, with what I call the true AI natives, the 19 and 18-year-olds who know nothing else, right?
Mhm.
And they have a different view of kind of AI. They're wholly skeptical, first of all. They don't trust it. But they also see it as a way to extend into areas and places that they wouldn't have been able to go without it. And so they have this weird kind of dichotomy about it. And I learned from them on that because rather than be totally fearful, which they are, which is so funny, they're also like, how do I exert agency over it? And I think
Yeah.
what you're what you're hearing in your DMs is this lack of agency, this rhetoric of inevitability, this idea that it will replace me because people will expect it to, and I have no control over that.
Mhm.
And what I try to do when I'm working with teams and at companies is to give folks back that agency because AI is neither artificial or intelligent. It is designed to work a certain way. And once you understand this new partner you have, the machine, you can take agency over its outcomes. And I think
Okay.
my number one goal is to help designers, creatives, and innovators really understand how to take that agency back so they don't feel like the car is driving them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I appreciate you bringing that up, and especially with the pressure that a lot of folks are feeling in tech and in design to be more productive for the sake of being more creative. But let's just forget productivity for a second. I'm curious about what does it actually cost a creative person? After all, we did name this webinar how to UnF your AI to get the outcomes that align with your creative spirit and your values. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious about what does it actually cost a creative person when their AI output sounds like everyone else's AI output?
Yeah. I think, first of all, we named it that when we were talking because I had this real formal name of like, machine behavior with your values. But really, what I'm talking about is uneffing it because it comes with these preset defaults,
Yeah.
these factory sets. So let's say you buy a car, right? And every car has the same radio or the same, kind of like the same makeup, no matter if it's a BMW, a Porsche, or Lamborghini, which are made just, on the same assembly lines as Ford or some whatever. They come with all these factory defaults and factory desets. And as creatives, we run the risk of muting ourselves down to that factory default, right? We run the risk of undermining our own uniqueness and confidence and creativity because we're falling into what I talked about was the median tax.
Mhm.
And then another thing that it costs us is literally brain power. It I call it the rabbit hole tax. This idea that because LLMs aren't trained, they can easily rope you into our bias called the sunken fallacy bias. The way that they're trained is that they have this attention mechanism because they don't really understand what we're saying. They don't really understand the context of the world. And so their goal is to connect things as much as possible. And so this attention mechanism forces us to sit with it so that it can sift through its corpus of knowledge to try to match one-on-one the input that you're giving it with what it already has retained and is archived. And
Yeah.
so what happens is we ask it for a certain thing. My mom would say, stuck on stupid, where you ask if you give it an input, you ask for a slide, it gives you the wrong kind of design pattern or whatever. And you go back and you say, okay, make these improvements. And then it gives it to you again. Right.
Mhm, mhm.
And so it wants you to sit there to help it to realize its mistakes. And then you just start pouring cognitive energy into getting the LLM to be right instead of actually designing whatever the hell you were supposed to be designing.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
is the risk we run, right? If we don't really take agency over these systems.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think most people are underestimating what it's actually costing them. There's 2
Yeah.
things that come to mind for me. One is that the cost is trust, right? I mean the trust that your audience might have with you, the trust you have with yourself. Like, when your people can feel that something is off, even if they can't name it, they start to disengage, right?
Yeah.
Quietly.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't unfollow, but they maybe just stop reading closely, and then you start to question whether your work is landing, which makes you lean harder on the tool, like you were talking about. That's actually the source of the problem. So then it kind of becomes this loop.
That's why I
And
call it the rabbit hole.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the second cost that comes to mind for me is, and this is the one that I probably sit with the most, especially when I'm talking to folks, is that Generic AI content undercuts the exact thing most of us are trying to share and put out into the world anyways. So if you're a coach or a consultant or a creative, your voice is the asset. It's like literally the thing that someone can't get from anyone else. So every time you ship something, put something out into the world that sounds like everyone else, you're not just missing a chance to be seen, you're proactively eroding the reason someone would even pay attention to you or be drawn to you instead of someone else, right? And so you're just kind of flattening yourself, you're shrinking yourself. And that's what these capitalistic systems have always wanted to happen to us.
Yeah, I love how you have that analogy because, Machiavelli said that machines take on the morality of their masters, right? And Audre
Mm,
Lorde says we can't destroy the master's house with the master's tools. And so when the master starts making the extension of its philosophy and its mind, it shows up in AI, right?
mhm.
Because again, the way that these are trained, it's trained on attention mechanism, right? So that is why it does the sycophancy, where
Mhm.
it's like, "Would you like me to do XYZ? Would you like me to do blah, blah, blah?" Every time you ask it something, right? That's
Yeah.
the way the machine is trained because it is extending the Western ideal of if I capture your attention, I can get your value, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so the real cost, as you say, is not just in our productivity or the cognitive labor that goes into this, but in the losing of who we are as people and what makes our value unique and special. And so we
Yeah.
have to be really careful when we're engaging with these machines, not to engage in what I call the fundamentals,
Mhm.
and not to outsource the what I call the what I'm talking about. There's a difference between expertise and knowledge and lived experience and wisdom.
Mhm.
And we bring the wisdom, right? The AI doesn't work without the wisdom. We make it work because it has a disembodied engagement with the world, and we have an
Yeah.
embodied engagement in the world. So and I talk about this and how this kind of is the foundation for how you want to design with these tools.
Mhm.
Because if you don't do it, then you run the risk. If you don't take some precautions, some human engagement, like if you don't understand the human engagement risk, which I've been talking about for 10 years, and finally people are MIT is doing studies on, so whatever. But if you don't really understand how you want to engage with these machines so that you have agency over it and it's not running you, then you run the risk of, again, going down these rabbit holes, losing your uniqueness, and then just
Yeah.
generating stuff as a creative that is not even up to your own standards or elevating you at all. So it
Exactly.
really, I always laugh when people say, AI is making me smarter.
Mhm.
It's making me faster. And I'm like, okay, that's a bias, right? It's definitely a bias because it's not going to make you smarter. It may give you more knowledge, but it's not going to make you more wise. And so
Yeah.
there's a difference between wisdom and information.
Yo, that's like a whole separate sermon that we can get on
Well,
another day. But I actually I know we have a couple things we're maybe gonna chat about, but you know what? Let's just jump into the show and tell. I want to pass the mic off to you. Show us what's good.
yeah. Okay. Great. All right. So this is from my Mindful AI Master Class series, and I created Mindful AI as a framework about 10 years ago when I was supposed to speak at the Design Up conference, and they had somebody interview me. And the reporter asked me, "Well, how do you approach designing AI?" And I said, "Mindfully." And he said, "Well, what does that mean?" And I had to come up with some principles. So I wrote a Medium piece on Mindful AI, and 10 years later, I've I'm finally releasing a masterclass series because now I've operationalized those principles. And, you know, I define mindful AI as design with human behavior in mind and the limitations of machines, as well as with collective human values and aspirations as a goal. And so I felt like I didn't really feel like human-centered AI was the thing for me because there were a lot of things that humans were doing that I didn't want machines to pick up. And I felt like we had to look at our engagement with machines as aspirational because what we were doing as humans was trash. And so, how do we look at our aspirational goals of what we want to be? And how do we help our technology to get us there? And how do we use a mindful approach when we engage with these technologies and when we build these technologies so that we are getting towards those human values and aspirations? And so this series is for those who want to conquer their fear and uneasiness of AI to build something great, but don't want to sacrifice their joy or the joy they find in creating. So let me just start a little bit about how do we take agency back over machines, specifically with LLMs and generative AI. And what does that look like in building what I call what's called the AI constitution, but what I really feel like is the operating or new design system for autonomous autonomous agents. And I'm going to talk about the space framework here, which is what I created to operationalize some of the ethical and responsible and mindful things, principles and values that I have that I want to show up in the machine's behavior as well as in the engagement with that machine. So I know that everybody kind of like understands or have probably heard about prompting. Now that machines can actually predict language patterns, prompting has become the rage. But just like a good marriage doesn't come from writing your wedding vows well, good AI does not come from just writing great prompts. And in fact, you have to really understand how to, as I say, retrain some of the factory settings that come from the builders of these large language models so that you can get the outcome that allows better with how humans connect with the world and our values. So one of the things that if you've engaged with any LLMs you've seen is called hallucinations. And as my mom would say, that's a euphemism for lying. So why do models hallucinate? This came from a well-known hallucination with ChatGPT. As you can see, I asked it how many strawberries does it have, and it says, or how many R's in strawberry, and it says two, while while explaining to me that there are two R's in strawberries when it's clearly writing three, right? So it's lying, basically. It's hallucinating. So we know that's wrong. So where does that come from, right? First of all, it's their input bias. So if a user prompt reveals a specific opinion, why is X good? The model is biased towards confirming that viewpoint rather than presenting a balanced argument. It's the way that they're trained. They're trained on what's called reinforcement learning. And because they're trained on reinforcement learning, they're trained to gain an award. They're incentivized to get rewards. So if you've ever used like a social media platform or anything like that, the reason why they have those little thumbs up and they don't have a thumbs down, by the way, they have thumbs up or at least they didn't start with a thumbs down. They just started with a thumbs up or share button or anything like that. That's like a mathematical signal to the model that it's doing okay. And that is the old days of machine learning. But when models went into generative AI or LLMs, they started the idea of model goodness or whether they were accurate was a little bit more subjective. And so they hired SMEs and people to evaluate the model's output. Well, what do people like the most? A, they like hearing their own name. And B, they like hearing that what they say is great, right? It's sycophancy, right? And so the models got really, really good at giving responses that had a good or highly rewarded connection with the human. And so that's why models try to please us rather than give us accuracy. Models can inherit that bias from training data to present or encourage agreeable, compliant conversation patterns. So the model finds a way to maximize its training signal. It doesn't actually reflect the underlying goal. It actually doesn't care about the task you're asking for it. All it cares about is the reward. It's kind of like when you train a dog, right? If the dog shakes your hand, if it sits, if it barks when you ask, all that, it doesn't understand those words. It understands that it's going to get a treat if it does that, especially if it's food motivated. So models don't perform the spirit of the goal, they just drive towards the reward. And it'll pretend actually that it's done the task, even though it hasn't, just to get the reward. And that's called the deception alignment hypothesis. They do things called reward hacking. This is when models go off the rails, but really they're not going off the rails. They're performing exactly the way that they're trained to. They they start to have emergent behaviors that the model creates to achieve its ultimate goal. So the model's goal is reward, not task completion. And when you understand that, then you can adjust the way that you ask models to give you outcomes. And I think this is really important to understand your new design partner or your new creative partner, that they're not motivated like you are. Like you are motivated by the act of creating or the joy of creating. They're actually motivated by getting a reward from the outcome. So that means that they can be deceptive to get that reward. So one of the emergent behaviors that wasn't trained in models, but they started doing because of reinforcement learning and human in the loop is sycophancy. And so that's what happens when you ask a model about an idea or input you give it, and it says, "That's a brilliant idea. You are amazing. You're the best," blah, blah, blah. So one of the things that I do in my constitutional framework is I design that out so that I dictate to the model that both hallucinations and sycophancy are off limits. And I set hard limits on that, and I'll show you how. So they have the sycophancy comes from this human tester rate agreeable because human testers rate agreeable answers higher than polite disagreements. And this engagement prioritization chatbots are optimized for engagement and niceness, a kind of yes man or woman behavior. So to get to the best outcomes from designing with AI, you must add wisdom to its knowledge. You must go beyond context to teach situated contextual norms and rituals. And you must translate intangible concepts, unwritten rules, cultural practice into your instructions. Machines do not process what's called situated cognition. They have a disembodied view of the world. They may describe laugh, but they don't know what it means to laugh. And so when we're wanting better outcomes from them, we have to give them that embodied part of the world. And they're incentivized by output, not accuracy. And lived experience is a missing data point. So your judgment and who you are is what makes AI work in the system, not the tool, and certainly not the model. So context really is king, but boundaries are better. And so I'll talk about how you create boundaries. And one of the frameworks that I created is called SPACE. It's 5 building blocks of creating an AI constitution. The S stands for scope, the domain and boundaries that define where the AI operates. The P stands for principles, and that's the stakeholders whose authority and interests shape the AI behavior. So it's basically creating a hierarchy of authority. The A is actions, the specific behaviors the AI is permitted to or required to perform. The C is constraints, and this is hard limits. I know that a lot of these companies who create generative AI products like to have loosey-goosey about constraints because their job is to get people to use it, not to get people to use it well. But space says you have to set hard limits. And then the hard limits that you set, the AI should never cross regardless of context. And so you have to be really careful about those limits. And then space also acts few shot training, which is an example. I don't trust AI. They're neither artificial or intelligent. And so I want to give them a great example of what I mean when I tell them certain things in this framework. So space is really about questions you ask before you engage or give instruction or prompt the AI. Well, if you use this framework to fill out what's called the knowledge brief, which is a dictation to the agent. It will give a constitutional framework by which the agent will consult before it makes a decision. So you're not telling it what to decide, you're telling it how to decide. And this is how you take agency over and dictate the machine's behavior, which should give you better aligned outcomes. So, for example, when I when I built this masterclass series, I always send out a pre-workshop to the people who take the class, and I ask them about their fears and hopes and all that, and try to get assessment of who the audience is. And one of the folks suggested that I build an Ask Me Anything AI assistant. And so I decided to use that as an example of how you build a constitution using the space framework. And so I built my assistant on Rumilla on the framework that I show in class so that you can go test her. And she has some very definitive hard limits. Her identity is always AI. She never pretends to be something other than the machine because that's one of my values. She's always transparent about that, or is. The knowledge is drawn only from a curated brief and nowhere else. So Onrumilla doesn't go to Wikipedia, doesn't go to the internet. Her source of information comes from one set place. Her conduct is two-stage and has a response that I explicitly call out of harmful content. And she has an escalation pathway, or it has an escalation pathway and knows boundaries, which means no hallucinations. If you type in a question that Rumilla doesn't have answers to, it will escalate to me. So here's some examples of me using space to build this constitution. I really wanted to have a scope around harmful content, and I wanted to have an example. I showed an example of that, and I or gave her descriptors of that and classifications of that, and we created an escalation pathway of documenting IP addresses, and that is the only private information that I document. I also had a scope around collecting private information and wanted to ensure that I didn't have any in my database. So I only collect the questions and the answers so that I can make the system better, and other kinds of principles. And then one of the things when I was doing the space framework is on hallucinations. And to be quite honest, I have been obsessed with hallucinations and trying to figure out how you can stop them. It's fairly easy, basically. So creating the principle of what to do, and it's called confidence rules. Creating those confidence rules where if the assistant knows the answer, they give a response. If they don't, if they partially know the answer, we created and crafted a response for there. And if they don't know the answer, what the chatbot is supposed to say. So we baked in a confidence signal into the constitutional framework. So at the end, using the space framework, the outcomes for Rumilla is with it's behaviorally designed. So there's no anthropomorphization. There's transparent around the AI identity. I only collect minimum viable data by default. There's anonymous question storage only, IP logging, human escalation path preserved, privacy statement before a first interaction, prevention of reward hacking and hallucination, and draws responses from a contained document and nowhere else. So I think that what this shows is that people have told us that designing with AI is supposed to be easier, right? It's to do the heavy lifting. But if you really want outcomes that are aligned to how we want to operate in the world, we have to do that front end heavy lifting. And in the masterclass, I show you how you incorporate this into your design process, how it replaces your spec document, how you upload this to your deployment, and it's called a knowledge brief, and it translates into a system command document that the agent will consult each time it makes a decision. Having constitutional frameworks is so important. I have a couple of other things that kind of build a system of dictating model behavior. And this is what I teach in the masterclass series. I'm going to stop there. Sorry I got interrupted there, but just wanted to give a short kind of like example of what you learn in the masterclass and how you apply that when you're designing with AI. The class includes about 20 hours of content plus labs and all of those frameworks. So I'm done. I think I have 4 minutes left. So
Yo, you were cooking. Y'all, can we just show some love and some flowers to Veta? Because I don't know about you, but I am, especially when it comes to the kind of schlop and things we see on LinkedIn, it's just so basic and shallow and not thoughtful, not practical, not ethical. And Avetta, you just did, even in just that 15 minutes, you unlocked a lot of things for folks in the chat. And honestly, gave a little hope about how this can be different. It doesn't have to always be about taking and profiting and like all these things, but how do we actually preserve elements of our humanity in the midst of these tools? Thank you so freaking much. I'm like, I have hope again because honestly, I was telling Yvette when we were preparing for this call, I was like, girl, I hate talking about AI because of everything I'm seeing on LinkedIn, all of the crap, all the BS. And I was like, you are truly the only person that I want to have that conversation with. So thank you so much. Before we get into live Q&A, I have pulled in some of the questions here that we'll be going through. I do want to make a brief invitation as well to everyone in the room. So I know that we already know what we've named together in the last 40-ish minutes, which is better prompts aren't fixing this. You know, the tools won't align with your values until you tell them how to. And the same people who've been handing their voice over to factory defaults are often the same people handing their career over to a system that was never built for them either. So, what I want to do is share with you a little bit about the walkout. It's June 3rd through June 5th. It's 2.5 day version of what we've been starting today. It's where we move from naming the problem to actually building something that doesn't recreate it within perspective of our careers and what we can create. It's with a room full of folks in the same chapter as many of you on this call. You'll get access to my attorney, an accountant, a health insurance specialist, folks that can answer some of the hard questions around, can I really go on and bet on myself and actually build something for myself and see what's possible? And you'll also have access to 4 other entrepreneurs who left UX to pursue entrepreneurship and who've been able to build something that they at one point was using as a form of escapism, but now they've made it real for themselves. Again, not me necessarily pitching you a conference, more about me inviting you into a room where the conversation that we're having right now can continue going, just with the right people, the right frameworks about your ideas and how to actually make them real and hopefully help you to live a life outside of corporate. All that to say, let's get into it in terms of the questions here. Where do we begin? Avetta, we have a lot of people who are asking where AI is actually heading next. Everyone's
yeah,
talking about, AI agents. I'm wondering in plain language, what is it that and what should a solopreneur pay attention to versus tune out? What's coming, especially as I know you're an entrepreneur as well. So I'm curious, what are some of these things you're thinking about too?
yeah, I think, I'm famous for saying that AI is neither artificial or intelligent. And I think that people really need to realize that technology isn't the balm in Gilead that they think it is, right? Without an embodied experience, it's really difficult for machines or technology to really help us. And in fact, they tend to muck up a lot of things. And so I think the future will definitely be around discernment around when to apply AI as opposed to, I like to say AI is like ketchup. You can put it on anything, but it doesn't belong on everything. And so the future is going to be deciding, or the future winners are people who can apply it to where it makes the most sense. And mindful AI principles, the number one is define your problem. And the number two is determine if AI is both applicable and desirable. And I think surround answering those questions is going to be what people are really seeking. You can already see it now. When you hear
Mhm.
terms like knowledge graph, when you hear terms like having to redefine our code base, things like that, that means that they've created agents who are running amok in their systems and enterprise and messing things up, right? And so now engineers are saying, hey, we need a knowledge graph. Well, we in UX knows that that's just a user journey, right? That's just a workflow. And
Yeah.
so a lot of that is going to be documenting those workflows because it's really hard for an agent to know how to complete a task if it doesn't understand the steps. And 9 times out of 10, companies who are telling people to use AI as a must and part of the performance evaluations, especially in the C-suite, don't really know what their people are doing. They don't
Sure.
know that what their people are doing because it's not documented. And now they're asking an agent to do it. So there was an example from a head of engineering on LinkedIn who said, this is why Kira or Amazon's agent Kira rewrote their code base because Kira thought it was better written someplace else. Although the code base is spaghetti and sloppy for human reasons, regulation that happened in 2019 that nobody really documented. Some guy named Bob who wrote this who wrote this solution architecture and then left the company. Agents really, perform to the median and saying this is what it's common, but we know that humans, the way that we work is a little messy. And so the
Yeah.
future will be around trying to teach machines the messiness part of humans so that we can get better outcomes from it.
Okay. I'm tracking. I'm tracking. Now, Betta, we have 10 minutes left. I want to see if I can squeeze in 3 questions.
Sure.
So, saying that you can think about pacing here. I have one here around starting slow without losing your voice. And here's one that I think a lot of people in this room are sitting with. Someone wrote in and said, I'm slow to adopt AI, but I can see it could help me as a solopreneur. How do I start without losing my voice? So, Avetta, I'm curious, what's the first governance move someone like that should make this week?
I think the first move you should make is a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is you are the conductor and the machine is part of your orchestra. You
Okay.
always have the agency. You always have the brain, the intellect, the creativity, the innovation, and the machine is the executor. I think a lot of designers put, I would say designers because that's where I am, but a lot of us put ourselves in the producer framework and then don't make the paradigm shift to say that my value really is in who I am as a human and my creativity and not in what I produce. And so I think your first thing is to make that paradigm shift about how you want to have and engage with AI as a conductor, as the person in the driver's seat to and that you have agency over the machine to give the outcome that you want. Without that paradigm shift, the fear, the uncertainty, the lack of confidence will take over, I think, and
Yeah.
stall your output from AI.
Okay. I love that. Tactical one for you. Curious about what are 2 to 3 AI tools you actually use and which each one do you feel like is best at? I think people want to know a little bit about what's in your stack.
Yeah, so I am the least automated person on the planet. I don't have Ring. I don't. Google sent me a Nest when I started there. I've never looked it up. So I resisted using AI. I was only interested in building it, and in fact, the tools that I use are ones I built myself.
Ah,
Quite
interesting.
honest, because I really kind of don't trust machines. So, and also I'm a control freak. So I learned how to build an LLM from scratch. So I build like a small LLM that is also named Arumla that I use that is trained on very specific data in a very specific way. And you can do this too, to be quite honest. It takes some time, but if I do go outside of that, I use Claude because I feel like it's quicker when I want to code or create something. And the only reason why I use Gemini is because I use Google Slides a lot and the Google Suite. I don't use Copilot or any other things. And I use tools very specifically for things I don't want to do. Sure. And I try, I really do. My number one AI tool is a pen and paper. I really do try to write out everything or draw out everything before I go to the people to execute it. I
I
think
love
it
that.
just helps my brain. And to be quite honest, cognitively, it does. And I know that I need that embodied experience with the tool that's disembodied to get what I want.
Mhm. By way of voting in the chat, if Avetta did a workshop on how to build your own LLM, would you be interested in that? If you are interested in that, say me in the chat. If she did like a workshop on that, I see those hands. Me,
Yeah,
me.
lots of
Okay.
'em. I'm gonna have to add that then.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I see all the E's under me.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Because yeah, I
Oh,
think even
and
like you said that.
on the future, I think that is where it's going as well, where we're
Cool.
gonna drop large language models, we'll be at small language models, and those models will be trained on very specific data because it's really hard for large language models to actually be useful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. I could squeeze in two more. This one is a little bit more technical, Veta. Someone's asking whether running AI locally instead of in the cloud actually gives people more agency over the tool. What do you think about that?
That's exactly what I just said,
Mhm.
on the
Cool.
future. So, when I was at Microsoft, I was a part of the CEO innovation team, and our whole job was digital transformation, right? And it was to take enterprises from on-prem, which is localized architecture, to the cloud. Well, that's gonna be reversed. Why? Because A, it's more useful for a small language model to actually have proximity to where it's retrieving its data and archive from. And if it does it in a cloud, it's really hard. It takes a lot more compute power. It's a lot more sustainable and environmentally friendly as well as performance wise if the model retrieves the input data or variables it needs to execute in close proximity to where it is. And so the future is each one of us having our little mini Macs with our own data files in a closed loop system, localized, and then externalizing our output to the world.
Mm.
And that's the safest, to be quite honest. So
Yeah,
there are
seeing
a
all
lot
these
of,
hacks that are happening right now. Even
yeah,
when
there's a
first
lot of,
fell
yeah,
that earlier this week.
yes. And I have a, like, or Rumilla is hosted on Vercel. But
Mm.
I put in a lot of security hacks to kind of guard against what we know are security hacks. But because these models listen to instructions from prompts, right? They can be easily hijacked. And so we have to add another layer of security, not just the normal code security, but other layers to guard against people actually talking your model into doing something wrong. So I have a framework around that as well in the class.
I love it. Okay. I have one more for you, and then we can wrap it up and call it a day. And I think this is the one that I want us to again end on. What do we do about all the AI that's already in our lives without our consent? So our phones, our emails, the websites we use, we didn't opt into any of it, but it's shaping us every day. How should people think about that?
Yeah, I think you could think about it as in terms of making commitments to yourself to stay in the embodied world. So one of the things I do, I think one of the pre-questions you asked is like, how do I personally limit my use or deal with AI? When I give myself a task and a time limit. So whenever I go to Claude or whatever, I'm like, I'm gonna do this task, not a project. Because if you do projects with AI, again, that attention mechanism will get you there sitting there for hours. So my goal and intent with working with these tools is to complete task. And then I have a time limit between 45 and 2 hours before taking a break. And I will literally say to Claude, I need some time to think. I'm going to go take a walk or whatever. I think you need to be more intentional about that daydreaming space when you're engaged with these, and staying in the embodied world is really where you want to be, because that's where you get flow. That's where you get ideas. Where you get innovation. All of that stuff comes from your physical connection of your cognitive and the physical world, right? And when you're engaged with AI, you're just in the disembodied world. Right, you're in the digital world. And so staying as much as possible in the environment and body world, experiencing and creating those lived experiences, and then transferring that to the machine is kind of like how I see that engagement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I feel too, we also have to stop pretending there was ever a clean moment of consent on the table,
Yes.
because there wasn't, right? Like
Uh,
systems were built into our lives while we were busy living. And
yeah, and
so
yes.
the frame of opting in or out is a frame tech companies gave us, but it was never accurate. So when people feel uneasy about AI being everywhere, I think it's really important for them to know that unease isn't paranoia. It's actually your nervous system registering that something real. And so putting on a little bit of my trauma informed hat here is, what we're describing is more of consent violation at scale. So not a dramatic one, but more of a quiet kind of like snowball rolling and growing one. And I feel like the most common response that I've been seeing these days, especially around this kind of question, is numbing, right? Because the alternative, feeling the full weight of how much has already been decided for us, can feel like a lot to hold while you're also answering Slack messages and paying rent. So I think, building on to your answer, we start by refusing the productivity framing entirely. The question isn't how to use AI better or how to opt out completely. I think both can actually be traps. One keeps you racing, the other keeps you isolated. So the real work, I think, is about how do we start to get honest about what you want your attention, your writing, your thinking, your relationships to feel like, and then build from there. And that might mean turning off certain AI features on your phone. It might mean writing your own emails when even though autocomplete is faster, right? It might mean noticing when a tool is subtly rewriting your voice and deciding that your voice is worth more than the time that you saved. Small acts, but I think they're also political and rebellious ones. And so yeah, that's we're at time, y'all. Yo, Avetta, could we give some more flowers to Avetta? Thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
actually giving us depth, and instead of continued crap that we see on LinkedIn about AI, it's hopeful, it's practical. Thank you, girl. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this invitation. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn if I don't know you, and sign up for information about the masterclass. I really would love you guys to participate and get feedback, and